This experience happened to me 9 years ago when I was 14. I used to live in a pretty bad area and went to a bad high school too, so every place my friends and I used to hang out was pretty seedy. There were gangs, the occasional drive-by shooting, and other crimes. We were all used to it though, and since we pretty much avoided that kind of scene, we weren't targets for any violence and were allowed to go wherever as long as we stuck together in a pack of 3 or more. One day, my friends and I made plans to go to the movies like we often did on weekends. It was a few hours out of the house, fun, relatively cheap, and we got snacks too, so we did this pretty frequently. We often went to this one shady movie theater that was literally on the outskirts of town, was barely in business, and had horrible staff, mostly because they let us into whatever movies we wanted, regardless of rating. So it was me and about 5 other people, and once we got there we stocked up on snacks, soda, and candy. Before long, I had to pee really bad, but my friends wouldn't accompany me to the bathroom, so I decided to go alone. The movie theater was really trashy. The floors were covered in trash, and there was maybe one employee working at the moment as far as I could see. The employee barely looked like she was 16. She looked pretty bored as well, and she was busy listening to her MP3 player and texting on her phone. I walked into the corridor that led to the bathrooms and entered the girls' bathroom. At first I thought it was empty, which made me both relieved and creeped out. I felt relieved because I was an awkward child who hated acknowledging people. I was creeped out because it was a pretty big, dirty bathroom that echoed and you always felt like someone was watching you. There were about 6 stalls. In the first section of the bathroom was your standard mirror and sink combo, and then there was a turn, and you had 2 sets of 3 stalls facing each other. I entered the very closest to the door so I could get the hell out of there as soon as I was done peeing, but I found that the toilet was covered in feces and what appeared to be period blood. The next toilet was absolutely encrusted in dirt, and the third and farthest inward was the cleanest. I stepped inside and started doing my business. That was when I heard the giggling. Low, steady, insane giggling. I froze. I wasn't sure where it was coming from, but my blood literally felt like it had turned to ice. The giggling was slowly growing louder, more to a sort of hard laughter, and I was really freaked out. I had no idea what to do, so I sat there when I should have ran. The door across from mine clicked open, and I saw a pair of shoes shuffling over. I prayed silently they would ignore me and continue to the door, but they didn't. They literally walked over to my door, slowly and purposefully menacingly, and stopped so that whoever belonged to those feet was facing my door head on, probably with their nose touching the door. I could hear more laughing. I thought for a moment I'd throw up. I looked at the shoes. For a second I felt relieved, because they were Mary Jane type shoes over a pair of white socks, and I thought maybe it was a little kid. But when I noticed the size, which was easily an adult size, I felt my stomach sink. The laughter also was deranged and didn't sound like a little kid's. I was paralyzed in terror. The person began scratching on the door, laughing hysterically, and I wiped myself and lifted my knees to my chest, staring at the shoes. They started getting onto their knees, and I felt full-fledged panic. They were going to try to crawl under the stall. On the floor, I saw a little frilly pink dress, about knee length, and a flash of long, greasy gray hair. Then, a hand reached under the stall. I was breathing heavy and crying at this point, unsure of what to do, since I was pretty much trapped. I texted my friends a bunch of times, begging for them to come and help me, but I assumed their phones were off, since I also tried calling them and nothing happened. The hands were long, veiny, and literally covered in burn scars and long, shiny cuts that had obviously been stitched in a botched job. In a stroke of bravery, I stuck out my foot and stomped the crap out of one of their hands. I was wearing a pair of clunky boots that used to be popular, so it must have really hurt. Their hands retreated from under the stall, and all I could hear was muttering. I wasn't sure what to do at this point, so I just stood there, waiting. Then, suddenly, in a completely sober, sane-sounding voice, this creepy old lady voice just said, "Open the frickin' door." I screamed at the top of my lungs, and she literally started saying the creepiest crap, no longer weird or crazy sounding. Eventually, I heard the bathroom door open, and she immediately stopped and retreated back to what I assumed to be a bathroom stall. When I exited the stall, I saw the young girl who was working at the front desk, looking concerned. At this point, I'd been in the bathroom for maybe 15 minutes. She told me she heard screaming, and I rushed her out of the bathroom before I could tell her what had happened. She was thoroughly freaked out and went into the back room for a minute, where she was getting her manager, I assumed. Another young-looking guy, but slightly older, came out and went into the girl's bathroom, knocking on the walls and announcing that whoever was there would need to leave. Upon investigating further, he found all the stalls were empty, so we assumed that when I'd went with the girl to go get her manager, whoever was harassing me escaped the bathroom. It was pretty traumatic, and when I went back to my friends, they were concerned about where I'd been. After I told them what had happened, we left without finishing the movie. We never went to that theater again. My parents wanted to contact the police, but I didn't, so that never happened. To this day, when I go to a movie theater, I force one of my friends to accompany me to the bathroom. I'm a 25-year-old male who lives in Florida. I'm fairly introverted and hardly ever get out of the house. This encounter happened to me about 2 years ago. It was about 12 a.m. and I was getting a bit stir-crazy and needed to get out and just chill with someone. So I texted a special lady friend of mine. We made plans to do our normal routine of hanging out at this nice secluded park. I went and picked her up, we drove to our spot, and spent a couple of hours just chatting about anything and everything. Then she got hungry, so we decided to hop in the car and drive down the road a bit to McDonald's. This is where things started to get weird. We arrived at McDonald's and went inside instead of the drive-thru. She ordered her food while I went to the restroom to wash my hands. As soon as I walked into the restroom, I saw this guy standing at one of those heater dryer things. At first I didn't think much of it, but then I noticed that he was kind of hunched over at it and wasn't moving. I continued to ignore him. I washed my hands and realized that he was standing at the only dryer in the place. All the paper towels were empty, so I awkwardly tried to ask the guy if he was done using the dryer. He didn't respond. At this point I was thoroughly creeped out. I just walked out and dried my hands on my shirt. I got out of the restroom and found my friend, and we sat down at a table to eat. About 20 minutes must have passed by, and we were headed back out to the car to go back to our spot. But prior to heading out, my friend had to use the restroom, so I figured I might as well have used it as well. When I entered the restroom, that guy was still standing at the dryer, mumbling something to himself now. I went into a stall to go pee, and I could hear him hitting the button on the dryer over and over again. I washed my hands again and didn't even attempt to get to the dryer, but this time the guy moved as I was trying to walk past him. He took a few steps back, right in my path, and just looked at me. I noticed he was around my age. He just kept staring at me and eventually said, "Excuse me." I put my head down, quickly said pardon me, and rushed around him to get out of the bathroom. 30 seconds later, as I'm waiting for my friend to get out of the ladies' restroom, the guy walked out. He just sat down at a table near me and was just staring straight at me. My friend walked out and noticed the creep just eyeballing me. She jokingly had asked me if I made a new friend while I was in the bathroom. I just shook my head at her and tried to lead her out to the car without making it obvious I was wanting to run away from the guy. Then he did the weirdest thing. He just started cracking up in laughter, like a madman. I was thinking to myself that this guy was super crazy and was gonna do something bad. Then he just stopped suddenly, looked down at my feet, and told me I had nice shoes. I quickly walked away out to the car. As my friend and I are getting into the car, we noticed the guy staring at me from inside McDonald's, just straight up eyeballing me with the creepiest stare ever. Then he stood up and started booking it towards us. He burst through both doors of McDonald's and started coming right at us, and now he looked angry. I pulled out of the parking lot so fast it was a good thing the roads were empty. My friend and I went back to our spot and hung out some more. Every car that we saw in the distance, I kept freaking out, expecting it to be the weird guy following us. My friend just teased me about it the entire night, and still teases me about it to this day, about how I made friends with a creeper in the bathroom who liked my shoes. This story happened to me a few months back. I'm an exterminator, and one of the crappy things about this job is where to go to the bathroom. We are strictly instructed not to ask customers to use their bathrooms, so that leaves the techs to find bathrooms in their area they can use. Parks, porta potties, stores, or one unfortunate time a bucket in the back of my truck. So this particular day started normally. I had a few stops in my normal area and felt the urge. Thinking quickly, I remembered a park a few miles from where I was that had an outhouse building, like a snack shack at little kids' baseball games and whatnot, but with bathrooms around the back. So I went to the park, and of course most sports are over for the season, so the bathrooms were locked. I was still relatively new to this job, so I called a coworker and asked if he was familiar with my area to help me find another restroom. He told me about a park that no one really goes to anymore, kind of abandoned because it was built next to a creek that overflows all the time, and the bathrooms are gross, but they are usually open year-round. I didn't care about cleanliness, I just really had to go number 2. I entered the estimated address into my GPS and headed that way. Apparently, I have driven by this place 100 times, but never noticed it. I pulled in and noticed that there weren't any other cars in there, so I made my way to the outhouse building. I grabbed my phone and made my way in. My coworker was right. It looked like they haven't been cleaned in a few years, and there was graffiti and mildew all over the walls inside. This didn't bother me because I really had to go. I headed into the cleanest stall I could find, which was still nasty, but cleaner than the others, and proceeded to mound up toilet paper all over the seat to make a cover. So as I was sitting there on the toilet, I heard the exterior door open. I should also mention that this park had a gravel parking lot and driveway, and it was overgrown a bit and covered with fallen sticks, so I would have definitely heard a vehicle pull in. As the door opened, I cleared my throat to let the other person know that someone was in there, and the door closed. I didn't hear anything for a moment, so I went back to reading on my phone, thinking that someone came in, saw how gross it was, and didn't have to go as bad as I did and left. After about a minute of silence, I heard footsteps. It was creepy, but I tried to ignore it. I was in the last stall furthest from the door in a line of 3 stalls. The footsteps grew closer. Still trying to keep calm, I figured out that this dude had to poop like me, so I didn't care. Then the footsteps sped up to a quick run and stopped directly in front of the stall I was in, and turned towards the door. All I could see were ratty looking tennis sneakers. There was a push against the door, and I said it was occupied. They stood there. Then there was a more forceful push against the door, and I told them once again that it was occupied. They still stood there in silence. Then the door started violently shaking as if this person was hell-bent on getting in. I yelled out one final time in a loud voice that the bathroom was occupied, and it stopped. The person slowly turned and walked to the door, and before shutting it laughed and turned out the already dim flickering lights. I finished up and ran out, looking all around and found no one. I checked my work truck, which was all locked up, and found nothing was wrong. I don't know who or what the hell that was, but it definitely creeped me out.